Ardennes Forest, December 1944. For weeks, German reconnaissance patrols had reported a static, almost lethargic American presence along the Siegfried Line, a perception that fostered a dangerous complacency within the Wehrmacht. This misreading of the enemy's disposition would soon precipitate one of the war's most brutal and unexpected offensives, a desperate gamble to reverse the tide of a conflict already tilting irrevocably against the Third Reich. The stakes were nothing less than the strategic initiative on the Western Front, a final, audacious attempt to break the Allied advance. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, a veteran of the Eastern Front, now leading a Aufklärungsabteilung, reconnaissance detachment of the 2nd Panzer Division, meticulously logged his observations. His patrols, often conducted under the cover of dense fog or the pre-dawn gloom, consistently noted sparsely manned American outposts, predictable sentry rotations, and an apparent lack of aggressive patrolling. The GIs, as his men derisively called them, seemed content to hold their lines, exhibiting none of the fluid, aggressive tactics Richter had come to expect from the Soviets. Richter's unit, typically comprising a handful of Kübelwagen light vehicles and a dozen dismounted infantry, would probe the American forward positions nightly. Their mission was to gather intelligence on troop strength, defensive preparations, and any signs of impending offensive action. The reports, compiled from these forays, consistently painted a picture of an unthreatening, almost lackadaisical opponent, reinforcing the High Command's belief that the Americans were indeed slow. Damage reports from minor skirmishes, often initiated by Richter's own patrols, corroborated this assessment. American return fire was frequently described as uncoordinated, their reactions sluggish, and their local counterattacks, when they occurred, easily repulsed. The intelligence summaries forwarded up the chain of command, based on hundreds of such observations, contributed to a growing confidence that the Ardennes sector was lightly held and ripe for exploitation. The tactical implications were profound. If the American forces were indeed stretched thin and unready, a concentrated armored thrust could achieve a breakthrough before significant reinforcements could arrive. This perception, born from the routine observations of men like Richter, became a cornerstone of the operational planning for the upcoming offensive, shaping the very axis and ambition of the attack. It was a perception built on a foundation of seemingly incontrovertible evidence, yet it was fundamentally flawed. The forested hills and deep river valleys of the Ardennes presented a formidable natural barrier, historically deemed unsuitable for large-scale mechanized warfare. German strategists, however, saw not an obstacle, but a conduit for deception, a sector where the American presence was thin and their combat experience, in many units, still nascent. This perception of American weakness, cultivated through intelligence reports and frontline observations, became a cornerstone of Hitler's audacious plan. Intelligence assessments, gleaned from prisoner interrogations and aerial reconnaissance, consistently underscored the relative inexperience of the American divisions holding the Ardennes line. Many were newly arrived units, or those rotated out of more active sectors for rest and recuperation, their training incomplete, and their leadership untested in sustained combat. This perceived softness offered a tempting target for a concentrated strike, a place where a swift, decisive breakthrough might be achieved before robust American defenses could coalesce. The German High Command, in their planning documents, noted the American logistical reliance on established road networks and their perceived lack of improvisation in the face of unexpected disruptions. They believed that a rapid advance, disrupting these supply lines and seizing key road junctions, would cripple the American response. This assessment, while containing elements of truth, underestimated the American capacity for adaptation and the sheer scale of their industrial output. Hitler's strategic vision for the Ardennes Offensive, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, hinged on precisely this combination of factors: surprise, the difficult terrain, and the perceived fragility of the American forces. He envisioned a powerful armored thrust, spearheaded by elite panzer divisions, exploiting the perceived gap in American readiness. The objective was not merely a local victory, but a strategic blow designed to split the Allied lines, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace on the Western Front. The German plan, detailed in operational orders distributed in early December, allocated significant resources to the seemingly improbable gamble. 3 armies, comprising 25 divisions, including 10 Panzer and Panzergrenadier formations, were secretly assembled under the cover of darkness and stringent radio silence. This concentration of force, hidden in the dense forests, represented a colossal undertaking, a testament to the German capacity for operational secrecy even in the late stages of the war. The intelligence landscape, however, was not entirely one-sided. While German patrols reported on the relative quiet of the American lines, American intelligence, through ultra-intercepts and aerial reconnaissance, had detected unusual rail movements and troop concentrations behind the German front. These fragmentary pieces of information, however, were often dismissed or misinterpreted, lost within the broader context of an expected German defensive posture. The prevailing Allied assumption was that the Germans lacked the resources for a major offensive, a miscalculation that would soon be brutally disproven. The German leadership, driven by a desperate hope, embraced the belief that the Americans, characterized as slow Yanks in some internal memoranda, would be caught unprepared and unable to react with sufficient speed and coordination. This underestimation of American resilience and their logistical depth became a critical, almost fatal flaw in their otherwise meticulously planned offensive. The stage was set for a confrontation where perception would clash violently with the reality of American industrial might and combat tenacity. The Ardennes, December 1944. A thin American line, stretched over 80 miles of forested, broken terrain, faced a quiet front. The prevailing Allied intelligence assessment, shaped by months of steady advance and the perceived exhaustion of the Wehrmacht, concluded that any significant German offensive action in this sector was improbable. This conviction, born of successful campaigns and a certain psychological momentum, created a dangerous blind spot. Despite this overarching assessment, scattered indications of unusual German activity did filter through. Intercepted radio traffic, prisoner interrogations, and aerial reconnaissance reports all noted increased rail movements and troop concentrations behind the German lines. These were, however, often interpreted as defensive preparations, redeployments for other sectors, or simply local counterattack capabilities, rather than a coordinated, large-scale offensive. The sheer audacity of a major thrust through the Ardennes, a terrain deemed unsuitable for rapid armored movement, seemed to defy military logic. The intelligence apparatus, a complex web of signals intercepts, agent reports, and photographic analysis, struggled to synthesize these disparate pieces into a cohesive, alarming picture. The sheer volume of daily information, much of it noise, made the identification of critical patterns exceptionally difficult. A report from 3rd Army Intelligence on December 10th, for example, noted considerable enemy movement in the Eifel region, but concluded it was unlikely to lead to major offensive action. The human element further complicated matters. The American units holding the Ardennes sector were often newly arrived, under strength, or recovering from previous engagements, designated as a ghost front due to its perceived quietness. Their patrols, venturing into the dense forests, occasionally encountered German forward elements, but these encounters were typically small-scale skirmishes, interpreted as probing actions rather than the vanguard of a massive assault. The mocking calls from German patrols, deriding the Slow Yanks, reinforced a perception of German overconfidence rather than a harbinger of their own. The critical misjudgment lay in the underestimation of German intent and capability. Allied planners, operating under the assumption of German strategic exhaustion, believed that any offensive would be limited in scope and objective, aimed at local gains rather than a decisive breakthrough. The detailed planning of Operation Wacht am Rhein, involving 3 armies and over 200,000 men, remained largely obscured, its scale unimaginable to those who believed the Wehrmacht was in terminal decline. Production logs, later captured, showed a surprising surge in Panther and Tiger tank output in late 1944, a detail not fully integrated into the strategic picture. The Allied air superiority, often a decisive factor, was grounded by persistent heavy fog and low cloud ceilings in the days leading up to the offensive. This meteorological anomaly effectively blinded reconnaissance aircraft, denying critical visual confirmation of the German buildup. Ground observers, peering through the gloom, often saw only fragments, their reports too localized to convey the true scale of the impending storm. The absence of clear skies, an environmental factor, inadvertently became a tactical advantage for the German forces. The intelligence failure was not a complete absence of information, but rather a failure of interpretation and prioritization. The available data, when viewed retrospectively, contained numerous red flags, yet these were either dismissed, misinterpreted, or lost within the larger context of a victorious advance. The belief in German weakness overshadowed the evidence of their desperate resolve, leaving the American lines dangerously exposed to a force they believed incapable of such a gamble. The German patrols, venturing cautiously into the American-held sectors of the Ardennes, encountered a landscape that seemed to confirm their preconceptions. They reported back a general impression of laxity, of a front line held by troops who appeared to be more concerned with comfort than combat. This assessment, relayed through company and regimental command, began to solidify into a narrative of American weakness. Interrogation files from captured American soldiers, often low-ranking and disoriented, inadvertently fed this perception. Their accounts, filtered through the lens of German intelligence, suggested a lack of experience and a reliance on overwhelming material superiority rather than tactical acumen. This reinforced a growing confidence within the German ranks, a belief that the upcoming offensive would exploit these perceived vulnerabilities. Unit diaries and after-action reports from these reconnaissance missions frequently noted the absence of robust defensive preparations. There were few deeply dug positions, limited minefields, and often a surprising lack of coordinated patrols from the American side. The American lines, in many places, presented as a thin screen rather than a formidable barrier. The German soldiers, particularly those who had fought on the Eastern Front, viewed this with a mixture of disdain and anticipation. They had faced the disciplined, often fanatical, resistance of the Red Army, and the relative quiet and apparent disorganization of the American sector felt like a stark contrast. This observation was often accompanied by a dismissive term for their adversaries, a casual slur that reflected their growing certainty of an easy victory. This psychological advantage, cultivated through weeks of observation and reinforced by the apparent lethargy of the American response, became a significant factor in the German High Command's planning. They believed the element of surprise, combined with the perceived softness of the American troops, would allow for a rapid breakthrough and a swift advance to the Meuse. The intelligence reports, while noting American logistical capacity, consistently underestimated their fighting spirit and adaptability. The prevailing sentiment among the German troops was that the Slow Yanks would be caught flat-footed, their technological advantages rendered moot by the speed and ferocity of the German assault. This belief, born of patrol observations and filtered through pre-existing biases, painted a picture of an opponent unprepared for the kind of war Germany intended to unleash. The quiet of the Ardennes, for them, was not a prelude to a storm, but an invitation to exploit a perceived weakness. The early hours of December 18th saw the first elements of the 10th Armored Division, Task Force X, begin their eastward movement from Luxembourg City. This initial thrust, comprising M4 Sherman medium tanks and M5A1 Stuart light tanks, along with supporting infantry and artillery, was executed under the strictest radio silence. The disciplined adherence to communication blackouts was a critical factor in maintaining the illusion of American disarray. A narrative carefully cultivated by the German High Command and eagerly consumed by its forward patrols. The rumble of tank tracks on frozen roads, however, was a sound difficult to entirely suppress, though the vastness of the Ardennes and the prevailing winter weather provided some natural acoustic dampening. The deployment was not a single, monolithic advance, but a series of coordinated, yet independently moving, columns. The 4th Armored Division, positioned further west, received its orders for a forced march towards Bastogne at 0600 hours on December 18th. Their route, often through narrow winding roads already slick with ice and snow, presented significant logistical challenges. Each tank, each half-track, each truck carrying supplies represented a calculated risk, a potential bottleneck if a vehicle broke down or encountered an unexpected obstacle. Unit diaries from the 4th Armored Division indicate an average road speed of approximately 10 to 15 miles per hour, a remarkable pace given the conditions and the sheer volume of material being moved. This speed was achieved through relentless driving, often without significant rest stops, and a pre-existing familiarity with night operations honed during earlier campaigns. The sheer volume of fuel consumed during these movements was immense, requiring constant coordination with rear echelon supply depots, a process also conducted with minimal radio traffic, relying instead on prearranged schedules and dispatch riders. The movement of these armored divisions represented a significant logistical undertaking, involving thousands of vehicles and tens of thousands of personnel. Production logs from American factories in late 1944 show a sustained output of over 1,000 M4 Sherman tanks per month, a testament to the industrial capacity that now allowed for such rapid and large-scale redeployments. This industrial might, coupled with a well-established and resilient logistical network, provided the foundation for the swift response that was now unfolding. The strategic implication of this rapid deployment was the sudden concentration of overwhelming firepower at critical points along the German advance. The very speed and scale of the American response directly contradicted the German intelligence assessments of American sluggishness and disorganization. What had been perceived as a scattered and retreating enemy was, in fact, converging with a speed and precision that would soon render the German advantage of surprise utterly meaningless. The forest roads, once echoing with the confident chatter of German patrols, would soon reverberate with a different, heavier sound. The pre-dawn chill still held its grip on the Ardennes, a familiar cold that seeped into the bones of the German reconnaissance patrols moving through the snow-laden forests. Their mission was routine, a probing of the American lines, a confirmation of the static, almost lethargic defense they had come to expect. Reports from the previous day had reinforced this perception: scattered outposts, limited movement, a general air of unpreparedness that bordered on complacency. The German High Command, having committed to the audacious Ardennes Offensive, relied heavily on this perceived American slowness, a fundamental assumption built into their operational timelines. As the first faint light began to filter through the skeletal trees, the lead elements of a German motorized patrol, comprised of 2 Kubel wagons and a half-track, emerged from a dense pine thicket near the village of Neuville. Their objective was a crossroads, a seemingly insignificant junction that offered a clear line of sight across a small, open valley. The patrol leader, Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, raised his binoculars, expecting to see the usual sparse American presence, perhaps a few jeeps or an isolated infantry squad. Instead, the valley floor was a tableau of steel, a dense, silent mass that defied all previous intelligence and expectations. Extending for what appeared to be kilometers, an unbroken line of American armor, tanks and armored personnel carriers sat poised, their gun barrels pointed eastward. The sheer scale was immediately apparent. Richter's initial count, a frantic tally of Sherman tanks alone, quickly surpassed 50. This was not a temporary deployment, but a formidable, organized assembly, a column of unprecedented depth. The patrol's radio crackled with urgent, whispered reports as other forward elements confirmed similar sightings. To the north, a bicycle reconnaissance team reported encountering a column of M4A3E8 Shermans, their wide tracks leaving deep impressions in the frozen ground, moving with a speed that belied their bulk. To the south, a dismounted patrol, attempting to flank a suspected American position, stumbled upon a convoy of M3 half-tracks, their cargo bays filled with combat-ready infantry, their engines idling. This overnight transformation shattered the prevailing German narrative. Production logs from Detroit and other American industrial centers, while accessible to German intelligence, had been consistently underestimated in their operational impact. The sheer volume of materiel, the logistical capacity to move such forces across an ocean and then into a contested front, had been deemed improbable, if not impossible, within such a compressed time frame. The 7th Armored Division, previously believed to be hundreds of kilometers to the west, was now demonstrably present, its spearheads already forming. The strategic implication was immediate and devastating. The German offensive, predicated on a rapid breakthrough against a soft American underbelly, now faced a hardened shield. The element of surprise, painstakingly cultivated, was effectively negated by the presence of these armored formations. The initial mockery of the Slow Yanks evaporated, replaced by a stark realization of a profound miscalculation. The landscape, which had been a canvas for German ambition, had, in a single night, been painted over with the ominous gray-green of American steel. The initial German probes had been predicated on an assessment of American greenness, a belief fostered by early encounters and the relatively slow pace of the Allied buildup. German intelligence reports, often based on limited engagements and prisoner interrogations from less experienced units, painted a picture of an adversary lacking tactical sophistication and operational speed. This perception, while not universally held, permeated the ranks and informed the aggressive, almost dismissive, nature of their early reconnaissance and harassment patrols. The strategic landscape, however, began to shift dramatically with the unexpected appearance of concentrated American armor. The German High Command, receiving battle reports from forward elements, initially struggled to reconcile these accounts with their existing intelligence estimates. Field dispatches described encounters with M4 Sherman tanks in numbers far exceeding anticipated deployments, often supported by integrated infantry and artillery. These were not scattered units, but cohesive armored formations executing coordinated maneuvers. Unit diaries from the 116th Panzer Division, for instance, recorded engagements where American armored thrusts, previously considered improbable given the terrain and logistical challenges, materialized with unsettling speed and force. Their own panzers, including the formidable PZ-KFW-4s, found themselves outflanked and outnumbered in localized skirmishes. The sustained pressure on their forward positions indicated a depth of American operational capacity that had been severely underestimated. The qualitative assessment of American equipment also underwent a rapid revision. While individual German tanks, particularly the Panther and Tiger, held a qualitative edge over the Sherman in terms of main gun penetration and frontal armor, the sheer volume of American production and the logistical networks supporting it became undeniable. Production logs from American factories, if accessible to German intelligence, would have revealed a monthly output of over 1,500 M4 tanks by mid-1943, a scale of industrial mobilization that dwarfed Germany's own strained capacities. This sudden confrontation with American armored columns forced a re-evaluation of the entire Western Front strategy. The notion of a prolonged period to consolidate gains and exploit perceived American weaknesses evaporated. The strategic implication was clear. The American forces were not merely present, they were capable of rapid, large-scale armored operations, a capability previously attributed primarily to the Soviets on the Eastern Front. This realization necessitated a shift from an offensive posture of probing and harassment to a defensive stance aimed at containing a powerful and rapidly developing threat. The quiet reflection among German officers in the aftermath of these initial encounters was one of stark surprise. The Slow Yanks had, in a matter of days, demonstrated an operational tempo and a material strength that fundamentally altered the calculus of battle. The mockery ceased, replaced by a grim acknowledgement of a formidable new adversary. The initial German thrust, leveraging surprise and the temporary disarray of forward American elements, had created a salient of considerable depth. This early success, however, was predicated on the assumption of a slow, piecemeal American response, a miscalculation that would soon become starkly apparent in the operational theater. The Wehrmacht's intelligence assessments, often colored by pre-war stereotypes and a degree of racial bias, had underestimated the logistical capabilities and strategic flexibility of their adversary. Within days, the American logistical system, often derided by German observers as ponderous, began to demonstrate an unexpected capacity for rapid deployment. From depots in France and Belgium, hundreds of M4 Sherman tanks, M10 tank destroyers, and M3 half-tracks, along with their associated supply trains and infantry complements, were being funneled toward the Ardennes. The sheer volume of material moving through the rear areas was unprecedented, a testament to industrial output and an organized, albeit sometimes chaotic effort. Unit diaries from the 101st Airborne Division, besieged in Bastogne, recorded the sound of distant engines growing louder by the hour, an audible harbinger of the approaching relief columns. The American command, despite the initial shock, had quickly reoriented its priorities, diverting entire divisions from other sectors and initiating a massive airlift to supply the encircled forces. This rapid redeployment confounded German expectations, which had anticipated weeks, not days, for such a substantial counter-concentration. The numerical superiority in armor and artillery that the Germans had enjoyed at the outset began to erode precipitously. Production logs from American factories showed an output rate of over 1,000 M4 tanks per month in late 1944, a figure that dwarfed the German capacity to replace losses, especially in their heavier Panther and Tiger models. This quantitative advantage, translated into combat power, meant that even significant German gains were unsustainable against the waves of fresh American units. Interrogation files of captured German officers frequently revealed a sense of bewilderment at the speed and scale of the American reaction. One lieutenant from the 2nd Panzer Division, captured near Huffeles, reportedly stated, "We thought they would be slow. They came like a flood." This perception of an overwhelming, relentless influx of men and machines began to permeate the German ranks, eroding morale and confidence in the offensive's ultimate success. The strategic implication of this rapid American response was profound. What was intended as a decisive breakthrough to Antwerp became a grinding battle of attrition, fought on ground chosen by the Allies. The German High Command had gambled on a quick, decisive victory, but instead found itself embroiled in a protracted engagement against an enemy whose industrial and logistical depth allowed for sustained, high-intensity combat. The winter landscape of the Ardennes, once a scene of German tactical triumph, transformed into a theater of relentless counterattacks. The initial mocking phrases about Slow Yanks faded, replaced by grim recognition of an opponent capable of absorbing massive blows and striking back with increasing force. The American capacity for rapid logistical regeneration and troop movement, honed by years of industrial mobilization, proved to be the decisive factor, turning a momentary German advantage into a prolonged and ultimately futile struggle. The average daily fuel consumption for the Third Army alone during the counteroffensive, as recorded in supply manifests, exceeded 800,000 gallons.